Well, ladies and gentlemen, there's some deep concern out there about a hurricane that looks like it's building off the Pacific. Did you see this, Mr. Producer? It's Hurricane Hillary. Hurricane Hillary. And they're concerned that Hurricane Hillary will be dumping all kinds of liquids and fluids, all kinds of water, just horrendous on California. You know that state can't handle a lot of water. And you see a lot of homes built on the various hills and hilltops, and all kinds of things tend to happen. So we hope our friends will be okay. But now they're going to know what it's like. We have Hurricane Hillary here on the East Coast. It's very ugly. Very ugly. And the impact on the climate, they should call her climate change Hillary, is just unbelievable. Hurricane Hillary. Just thought you'd want to know. This guy we told you about before, actually yesterday, who's an Obamaite and who decided to hold water back. And he's accused now of preventing access to more water by the fire departments on Maui. Because he's a climate change fanatic. Already, I would love to know how many lives have been lost or how many people are harmed or injured as a result of climate change fanatics. And we know the reliance on electricity and electricity alone and the growing reliance on electricity is nuts. So we have a complete sort of fusion. Electricity setting the island on fire, and an individual reportedly involved in withholding water from the fire department. Not directly, but he wouldn't give them the water they asked for, so that's direct enough as far as I'm concerned. Climate change, the future, it's just going to be fantastic. It really is. Starvation, inconvenience at a minimum. All these great things are going to take place. Anyway, I want to move on here. The United States Department of Injustice is asking for a 30-year sentence for the leader of the Proud Boys, who was convicted of sedition. This is how CNN reports it. The Justice Department is seeking 3-decade prison sentences for the leaders, plural, of the Proud Boys convicted of seditious conspiracy for plotting and leading the crowd at the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot, positioning the men as failed, thuggish political revolutionaries. This is weird. I thought Donald Trump was responsible for this, Mr. Producer. In a new court filing, prosecutors say Enrique Trillo, Ethan Nordine, Joseph Biggs, Zachary Real, and Dominican Pizzello, quote, intentionally position themselves at the vanguard of political violence in this country for years on January 6th, sought to change the course of American history. Don't you think this is a little dramatic? Seriously, folks? These guys, whether they're armed or unarmed, they didn't show any weapons when they went into the building. They didn't fire any weapons in the building. They didn't use any knives or swords or hammers or anything when they were in the building. They didn't use pepper spray, bear spray, smoke bombs, stink bombs, nothing. And according to the Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and prosecutors, they were leading a revolution to overthrow the country. The jury found Pizzola not guilty of seditious conspiracy, and he's not alleged to have leadership positions in the organization. Are they guilty of having leadership positions in this crazy organization, or are they guilty of having done something? The defendants understood the stakes, the prosecution, and they embraced their role in bringing about a revolution. There was no revolution. The revolution's taking place right now. They unleashed a force on the Capitol
that was calculated to exert their political will on elected officials by force and to undo the results of a democratic election. This is an essay. This is an essay. Nothing more, nothing less. The foot soldiers of the right, armed to keep their leader in power. That would be Trump. They failed. They are not heroes. They are criminals, prosecutors wrote in the news filing. Court filing, in many ways, is the summation of the years-long effort by U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. to prosecute hundreds of rioters. They've prosecuted 1,100 who inflicted violence at the U.S. Capitol on January 6. I thought they were accused of leading a revolution. Were they found guilty? That is sedition. Were they found guilty of violence? Of specifically hurting somebody? I don't know. Are even more responsible for the attack than the leadership of another militia group, the Oath Keepers, who stashed weapons just outside Washington as backup and suited up in military gear to march into the riot. They stashed weapons as backup? Did they use them? No. I'm sorry, I'm just being honest. I know I'm not allowed to be. All of a sudden, I'm going to be a white supremacist, me the Jew. Stuart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers, received a sentence of 18 years in prison for his role on January 6, following his conviction of seditious conspiracy, the longest sentence so far among any defendant from that day. They asked that he get 25 years. The conduct of these defendants is more egregious than that of the Oath Keeper defendants, warrants greater sentences, the prosecutors wrote. It's critical that this court impose significant sentences of incarceration on all the defendants in this case to convey those who would mobilize such political violence in the future that their actions will have consequences. Oh, really? Is there one Black Lives Matter individual involved in violence who has served 25 or 30 years? Remember those two people, both lawyers, Ivy League lawyers in New York, who threw a Molotov cocktail into a police cruiser? Remember that, Mr. Producer? Remember that, America? Threw a Molotov cocktail into a police cruiser. Thank God the police weren't in their cruiser. The Department of Justice took a different position. The Department of Justice said, look, these are first offenders. They meant well. They weren't really trying to hurt anybody. You remember this, America? And they got off. They spent a minimal amount of time in jail. Minuscule. And they got out. At the request of the United States Department of Justice. So you're going to have some people do 30 years, this other guy doing 18 years. I don't know them. I don't know their groups. 30 years, they're asking. The other guy, 18 years. And the people who threw Molotov cocktails in an NYPD cruiser, obviously trying to kill one or two police officers, the same Department of Justice argues that they've had enough time in jail. I think it was like 6, 8, 10, 12 months at max. And they let them out? This is why I read these stories to you. I can blow them off like everybody else or say, I don't need the grief that comes along with talking about these things, but I'm talking about these things. It makes no sense, does it? Unless you understand what's going on. It's funny to hear these prosecutors talk about revolutionary activity. Black Lives Matter talks specifically about overthrowing the country, that it pushes the Marxist doctrine. It's very specific about it. They don't talk about them that way, that they're revolutionaries, even though they claim to be revolutionaries, trying to overthrow the government, even though they claim that they're trying to overthrow the government. Same with Antifa. So you see, if certain people want to overthrow the government, even violently, they're peacefully protesting. In at least 2 cases, the Department of Justice will come to their defense. But if you're part of the Proud Boys,
well, you ought to get 30 years. Each of them, 30 years. Now, I watch these shows on television in addition to doing a ton of reading, that, like A&E, you watch the first 48, shows like that. And sometimes they'll circle back to show, what the kind of sentence these people get. Murderers get 30 years, sometimes with a chance for parole, sometimes not. Murderers get 30 years. Murderers. The fact is, these people didn't even come close to overthrowing the United States government. They didn't come even close. It was ugly. It was violent. But you want to talk about ugly and violent? Remember when the Puerto Rican freedom terrorists, a.k.a. freedom fighters, were sitting in the gallery, the House of Representatives, and they unloaded their pistols. They actually almost killed one congressman and hit others. And trying to overthrow our country. Bill Clinton let most of them out. Barack Obama let the last one out. Or the explosions in New York that killed cops. Remember them? Or Barack Obama, whose buddy was a domestic terrorist. Students for Democratic Action, remember them? People were injured. In the end, people actually got killed. Remember the effort to blow up the Capitol building and the Pentagon? Remember that? Daniel Ellsberg in the crowd? Remember that? Daniel Ellsberg died recently as some kind of hero? Remember all that? Now, these are people who used real weapons. Bombs, guns, murder, mayhem, shot people, blew up people. And they were never talked about like this. They all got lenient sentences. Or they all got out early. Case of Obama's buddy, there was some kind of technical issue on his trial, so he never served a day that I understand. So don't lecture us about this, please. And while we're here, there can be violent efforts to overthrow the government, and there can be nonviolent efforts to overthrow the government, and every communist philosopher for the last 150 years has talked about the West, and you need nonviolent revolutions. They call them passive revolutions. As Thomas Jefferson said, you can have the tyranny of the elected, the tyranny of the legislature. It's just as bad in the end as the rest. Because what you wind up with in modern times now is a police state.